Shalom and welcome to His Israel. This is Karen Hannah in Jerusalem, and we are still busy exploring the whole process of being holy, being whole, which is in connection with the Hebrew months. And this new series of the Hebrew months is called Keep Climbing, because our whole life is a climb. It's an effort to grow and reach greater heights, as it were, spiritually, as we do learn and grow and become, hopefully, more whole in ourselves and more holy in the sight of God. So let's the second Hebrew month that we're looking at and exploring now is the month of IYYAR. And IYYAR is a very significant month. It's very important because it's a bridge. It's a bridge between the great biblical feasts of Pesach, Passover, which we celebrated last month in Nisan, which is the first Hebrew month of the biblical calendar. And then it bridges Pesach or Passover with the important festival next month, which is the month of Sivan, and we celebrate in that the festival of Shavuot or Pentecost. So IYYAR is this important month in between those two festivals. But not only shalom, shalom to all who are joining. Good to see you here. And I was saying about this month of IYYAR, not only does it bridge Passover and Shavuot, Pesach and Pentecost, but it also has, in our modern history of Israel, has become very important because now we celebrate the wonderful holiday of Yom HaAtzmaut, which is Independence Day for Israel. And we're right on the edge of it now. It's about to be coming in any minute. That's why I have the flag up and one flapping outside on the balcony. And that the fact of Independence Day, Yom HaAtzmaut, is just as much of a miracle as even the Exodus from Egypt was, because it took, God of course uses people, but it's He performs the amazing miracles that keeps Israel alive and growing even to this day, which we can celebrate and rejoice in. So let's go back though to look at the time between Passover and Pentecost, Pesach and Shavuot. Shavuot always falls on the 50th day after Passover. So that means these 7 weeks, the 49 days before that Jubilee Day of Pentecost. And the whole month of IYYAR, this second month, falls during that 7 weeks. And we do what is called counting the Omer, which means counting the days, those 49 days leading up to Shavuot after Passover. Now, what is this counting? Why should we bother with this counting the days? Well, firstly, it's just to be aware and recognize the importance of these days that are as we cross this bridge from the redemption at Passover to the revelation at Pentecost, at Shavuot. Very important, because, you know, when God liberated or saved His people out of Egypt, they weren't immediately prepared and ready to receive the great revelation He had in store for them at Sinai. So they needed these former slaves, even now they were redeemed, they needed healing. They needed physical healing, they needed mental healing, they needed spiritual healing. They just, in order to be ready for the revelation. Otherwise, the revelation would have just been too much. They couldn't have contained it. It would have been too powerful for them. So it took these 7 weeks of healing and preparing for them to be ready, so that instead of the slaves, they would now become God's holy nation and kingdom of priests set apart unto him. It was a huge, huge thing. Now, this month of IYYAR in Hebrew is spelled Aleph, Yud, Yud, Resh. And that Aleph, Yud, Yud, Resh is an acronym for Ani Adonai Rofecha. I am the Lord your healer. This is the powerful proclamation that God made when he made the promise to his children during this month, shortly after the redemption from Egypt. So they were redeemed out of Egypt. And then God says to them in Exodus 15 verse 26, he says, if you will diligently hearken to the voice of the Lord your God, and do that which is right in his eyes, and give heed to his commandments, and keep all his statutes, I will put none of the diseases upon you which I put upon the Egyptians. For Ani Adonai Rofecha, I am the Lord your healer. So we know that the diseases that were put on the Egyptians were mostly the result of the plagues. And what was the purpose behind the plagues? Just very briefly, it was to prove that the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the God of Israel, was the one true God. And that he was trying to prove that these false gods, that the idols that the Egyptians were worshipping had no power, that they were idols, and that he was God. So let's just see what happens now. They during the 7 weeks, what did these slaves need? They needed the bread from heaven. God provided this manna. And apparently this manna, this bread, miraculous provision, was so perfect that it had contained everything the body would need for nourishment without any waste. It would just be pure, perfect food that would bring healing to their bodies. It would strengthen them physically. And another thing they needed for the physical healing was the waters of Marah. So the waters of Marah were first bitter waters, which they drank and said, oh, we can't drink this, it's too bitter. And then Moses threw in the limb or the branch or tree into the waters, and it miraculously became sweet. And but the funny thing is that they probably needed that first drink or swallow of this bitter water that could start working and maybe clearing out parasites, who knows, but it would help their bodies. And then the sweet water after that. And often if God needs to discipline his children or bring correction or healing, it can be bitter at first. It can be a bitter pill to swallow, as it were, but then afterwards his sweetness comes in and makes up for it. So these were the things that the slaves needed. And we just can think that it was during this same month of IYYAR that Yeshua, the Messiah, after his crucifixion, death, and burial, and then being raised from the dead, that happened when? At Passover, last month of Nisan. Now it's IYYAR, and what happens? He had to return to the Father and then come back to earth in his resurrected body. And it was during this month that he was meeting with his disciples. He broke bread with them, he ate with them, he walked with them and talked with them, and he gave them deeper understanding and revelation, I believe, of the will and heart of the Father. And what did he say? He said to them, now wait in Jerusalem until the day of Shavuot, of Pentecost, and And that's what they were doing. And this is what we should be doing. We should be counting these days, preparing our hearts and preparing ourselves for whatever revelation the Father has and wishes to impart to us at the season of revelation, of Pentecost, of His Spirit. So we should be in this mode, as it were, of preparation and anticipation as we count the days now leading up to it. So, I mean, as I said, we know only too well that just as the Israelites, the slaves redeemed from Egypt, were not immediately perfect and holy, even after Sinai, even after receiving that miraculous revelation of the presence of God and the Word of God at Sinai, they didn't immediately be perfect, holy people walking perfectly in His will, did they? They were stubborn, they made mistakes, so this whole process of really becoming more holy or whole, it's a lifelong process. And what does it involve? It involves learning the Word of God, walking it out in accord with His will. And then part of that all is receiving His healing and restoration, physically, mentally, spiritually, emotionally, every way that's possible. And it's a process. But very often, basically, this process is a battle of wills. It's a battle of wills. And it's God's will against man's will. It's our will, which we can be stubborn sometimes, but it's the whole wanting to get ourselves more and more in alignment with His will. You know, to be in the kingdom of God. Oh, Alana's there. Alana, I'm so happy you're feeling much better. And I'm so happy you could join us for healing. It's your month of healing. All of us, we need, wherever we need healing, I'm sure God is faithful and true to help us. Because, you know, to be in the kingdom of God, what does it mean? It means being subject, to have our will subject to His will as the King. He's the King. I mean, in all we do, whatever it is, we can ask ourselves, now, am I transgressing and moving out of the will of God, or am I remaining steadfastly in His will? Now, we know His will is perfect. He wants the very best for His children. So it's because His will flows from the heart of a loving Father. And it's in our own best interest to bring our will more and more in line with His will. That makes sense, doesn't it? However, we do have an enemy of our souls, and the wiles of the enemy are very powerful and enticing and constant. He's a very determined enemy to try and pull us out of God's will. And I mean, very often it's our own stubborn will that gets in the way. That is a problem as well. But interestingly, the Hebrew word for transgression is avera, which means straying over a boundary. But there's a positive word from that same root, avar, which is what Abraham did when he crossed over, as it were. He left the idolatrous society that he had been raised in, once he came to know the one true God, and he crossed over. It was physically, of course, he crossed over in answer to the call of God. He heard the call of God, and in faith he stepped over and he went towards the land that God had promised, but not knowing where it was. So it was a great step of faith. But it did also entail him crossing over spiritually into the kingdom of God. And we see in the Bible, in the narrative, that Abraham's will was so surrendered and in harmony with the will of God. He was always quick to obey the will of God. And he became the father of the family of God. Those who would enter his household as his children and would know his love and would serve him with loving faithfulness, just as Abraham did. So that is he's our, role model. And of course, Yeshua came, and he was a perfect illustration of, as the Word made flesh, of how to walk in that Word, how to be in line, in perfect harmony with the will of God as expressed in His Word. But this journey of faith, it requires constant growing in maturity, mentally and spiritually. And in this series, the Keep Climbing series of Being Holy, Being Whole, we're concentrating on the principal human characteristics, and seeing where we need in ourselves, where we need to establish balance maybe, or strengthen any weak areas. We all have strengths and weaknesses, and this helps us identify where our weak areas are and trust the Lord to help us strengthen and bring balance in this in order to align ourselves better with the will of God. And the characteristics for this month of IYYAR are order and healing, as we've been saying. Now, the characteristic of order reflects the balance that we're aiming to establish in our lives. It all comes back to keeping in balance. And Alan Morinus has written a really good book called Everyday Holiness, which I've been referring to a lot for this series. And he says that the inner alignment, order brings that inner alignment that results in filling our days with peace and preparedness. Now, that doesn't mean to say that finding that alignment and balance will just automatically bring peace no matter what's happening. Well, it does actually. I mean, it doesn't really depend on the circumstances, because sometimes even if the circumstances we find ourselves in are a bit chaotic, if we have that inner balance, in balance with the will of God, then we can have peace no matter what the circumstances are. But hopefully our hope is that finding more peace in ourselves will bring more peace into our homes, our surroundings, and all our dealings will be done with this inner peace. Because any area in our lives that's in disorder will bring chaos one way or the other. And we know in the Word that God is a God of order, and He's concerned with the little details. Details are important to Him, and often these little details are crucial. And modern psychology has proven, well, it's quite an obvious fact, we all know, I'm sure, that external clutter and chaos is a reflection of inner disarray. So if we're somehow leaving certain areas in our lives or in our surroundings in mess and chaos and clutter, then it's showing that it's a reflection of something internal that needs our attention to bring that back into order. And we also need to be aware that the ideal always is balance, because every one of these characteristics has the perfect order, the perfection of that characteristic is balance, all right? So if our order is in balance, we will have peace and be prepared. But it can go to the one extreme. If it goes like little or no order, the less order there is, it ends up in chaos and confusion and mess and clutter, and so that's the one extreme. But you can also take it to the other extreme, and on this side, if you go too far, carry the order too far, as it were, it results in an obsessive kind of perfectionism. Everything has to be so perfect that you become obsessive about it, and everything becomes rigid. There's no flexibility in anything. That because you have to have that control over everything, and everything is rigidly in place, and that's also not a good. It won't bring peace, let's say. It'll be out of balance. So you can go to one side or the other, but we're aiming to find the middle perfect balance of each characteristic. Now, you know, it's funny that we're talking about external order and even mentally to have our thoughts in order, but our spirit, our neshama in Hebrew, that very deepest part of us, our spirit, that's a spark of God, as it were, in us, that He breathes into us. Your spirit knows when something's out of order spiritually, and to the extent that we're living outside of God's will, even if it's in an area, if it's intentional or not, it can even be unintentionally. We've kind of transgressed. We've moved a bit out of over the boundary of His will, and we don't have that protection over us. And but our spirit knows, and you'll have this little nagging prompting, as it were, of the spirit inside, because our spirit always is yearning and longing to be in as close and intimate relationship with God as possible, to get as close to His spirit, and so our spirit, when we losing that harmony and that closeness of relationship with Him, our spirits are in pain, and they're yearning to restore that closeness with God again. And that restoration will only come when we, in harmony with His will again, come back into His presence and into His will. Now, how do we know the will of the Father? Obviously, the main way is we find it in His Word. I mean, in the foundation of His Word, which is the Torah that Moses was given the revelation of at Sinai. And everything builds on that foundation, because that's like the blueprint of His will is found there in the Torah. But it's funny that at Sinai, we know when we read about it in Exodus that His voice thundered. And the sages even say that that thunder echoed and rippled out in 70 languages to all 70 nations. Which tells us what? It tells us that even though the Torah was then being given, His word and presence were then being revealed to the Israelites, but His end will was that it would reach out to all the nations, that all would come into the knowledge of God and come into His kingdom, which is why was the miracle of Yeshua coming, so that He would break through and open that way, so that the word of God would go out to all the nations, and everybody would come into that knowledge of God and be able to come into His kingdom. But after Sinai and that thundering voice, what happened? His voice, it was as if He pulled back, because His voice suddenly became a still, small voice, as we know from the prophets. That it had to be your spirit had to be so in tune that His spirit could speak to your spirit, as He did with the prophets, and they could speak His word out to the people. And we know with Elijah, he was running away in fear, and he didn't hear God's voice in the earthquake or the storm or the thunder. It was only when all the noise of the world calms down, then you can hear the still small voice. And we need to do that very often too. There's a great clamor of noise from the world filling our thoughts and our minds very often, and we need to quieten ourselves. That's why our quiet times are so important, where we're pulling aside and just with the word and with prayer to hear the voice of God and be able to recognize His voice. Now, interestingly enough, our purpose is, as His children, as His servants, is to serve Him by working with Him, partnering with Him in Tikkun Olam. We've spoken about this before. Tikkun Olam is bringing healing to the world, the brokenness of the world. He's wanting to reach out, and wherever there's any brokenness in the world, to bring His word of truth and His love and bring healing in that situation. But most powerful tool we have in doing this is speech. Why? Why do I say that? Because God created everything with His word, with His speech. He spoke everything into being. So we have to recognize the amazing power He's given us in this gift of speech and communication. That, in the Talmud, it's noted that 10 measures of speech were given to the world, and 9 of these were allocated to women. 9 out of 10. You can imagine some of the jokes that could be sort of made with that, like, well, no wonder women talk so much or whatever. But it's not a derogatory thing, actually, because the same Talmud also says 10 measures of beauty were given to the world, and 9 of them were given to Jerusalem. So women are on a par with Jerusalem. That's nice. But seriously, it does highlight the fact that as women we face a greater challenge. We have the responsibility, a greater responsibility even, to use our words and communication skills in a positive and constructive manner, not negatively and destructively. But of course, the most important way we use our speech is in prayer and in song and praising and in blessing, giving blessing through our words to others. All the different blessings. There's so many we could go in, and blessings of encouragement, of sharing His love, of building up people. And do you know that the both holy temples in Jerusalem were destroyed through hateful and negative speech? That's how powerful that influence of that negative, hateful speech was, and in that the temples were destroyed. And that's what we're doing with our words. We can either be building up ourselves, not telling ourselves a whole lot of negatives and lies even that we may have heard being spoken to in our lives. So it's what words we tell ourselves is important in building ourselves up, and also in others. We can speak positive words to build others up and not break them down. All these things are very, very special and important. And so because our words either express God's will or the enemy's, and that's a good check there. Now, is what I'm saying in line with God's will or not? And the more clearly our speech can reflect His truth and love and kingship, the more we can work with Him in this tikkun olam, bringing healing and restoration and establishing His kingdom on the earth, all for His glory and with His help, which is always there when we need it and ask Him. So we've come to the end. Our time is up. So I just would like to say that during this month of IYYAR and the counting of the Omer, counting the days in anticipation and preparing ourselves, may we strengthen our connection with God's word and grow richly in spirit. May we also trust our faithful healer for physical healing and increasing wholeness and holiness in our lives, for ourselves, for all Israel, and for all the world, for His name's sake. Amen. Shalom, shalom.